So I'll just jump right into the preliminary reading before we jump into the clip, just to kind of give you a little bit of a backdrop. So, as Tolkien, would say, that the Lord of the Rings is, quote, an essentially Catholic work, unquote. He also says, quote, my entire concept of beauty begins with originates with the most blessed Virgin, unquote. So he's everything about Lord of the Rings. There's so many layers to it. Even though it's not direct allegory like C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, there's the mystery of the faith is embedded into the Lord of the Rings. And so the kind of Gandalf, to give you some examples of the people that you're going to be seeing in this short little clip of Gandalf, who we see right now, and Aragorn the king, who's Gandalf's even though Tolkien didn't say this, but Gandalf's he's like Christ the prophet, whose wisdom everybody heeds. Aragorn, who you're going to see in just a moment too, he's like Christ the king, who is to be enthroned, and like Frodo, who's supposed to be taking the ring to Mordor to destroy it because it's intrinsically evil. He's like Christ the priest, who bears the burden of the ring to Calvary, you might say. So there's it's multi-layered in the Lord of the Rings, and you can see the clarity and this distinction between good and evil, darkness and light, beauty and deformity, and all those beautiful concepts. It's basically, this is what you're watching is actually Catholic culture and the spiritual combat made visible. So the clip we're about to look at is called, even though it's not, it was called by Jackson the Army of the Dead in the film. Suits my purpose for tonight, but it's actually Ted. What was it called? It was the Paths of the Dead, or the Men of Grey. What was it? What was the They're the descendants of Numenor. So they're called the Oath in the book. They're called the Oath Breakers. The Oath Breakers. So they actually, it's kind of interesting because we have oaths too. We have baptismal promises, and so they, so. Like the souls in Purgatory, they kind of they weren't completely faithful to their baptismal, so they're purging themselves, and now they can rest in peace, like the army of the dead will rest in peace once they fulfill their oath and satisfy what they didn't satisfy when Aragorn's grandfather Isildur called upon them to fight for them, which they actually abandoned him. So that's what they were banished to the mountains because they didn't fulfill their oath. So. With all that sort of imagery in mind, I'll just read the kind of the quick spliced synopsis, and then we'll just jump right into the clip. So, The Return of the King, the third book, says, it was Malbeth, the seer, who predicted that the day would come when one of Isildur's heirs, namely Aragorn, would take the road under the mountain to summon the army of the dead out of a great need. This prophecy came true during the War of the Ring, which is what was going on. You'll see Gandalf talking about all the enemy just regrouping. The War of the Ring. King Theoden feared that the soldiers they have left are not enough to help defend Minas Tirith, or the White City. You'll see the White City. Aragorn knew that this was true. Elrond, who is the elf that he announces to Aragorn that he can actually round up this army. Elrond, Elrond, who came to visit, reminded Aragorn of the paths of the dead, where a part of his destiny awaits. Aragorn knew that the army of the dead would be a great advantage for them on the battlefield. He summoned the courage to go through the paths of the dead as Isildur's heir. Aragorn summoned the army of the dead to the Stone of Eric. They don't portray the Stone of Eric in here, but they take some poetic license. There he gave a passionate speech and commanded them to fulfill their oath by fighting with him against Sauron. It is only in this way that their souls could be totally and finally released from Isildur's curse. The king of the dead, along with his army, followed Aragorn's lead. After defeating the corsairs in the Haradrim, Aragorn sounded the trumpets to assemble the army of the dead, he told them that their oath had been fulfilled and gave the army of the dead their freedom. With this, the king took a step forward. That's the king of the dead, took a step forward, shattered his spear, and discarded it. He then bowed to Aragorn before he and the rest of the army vanished for good and rested in peace. So they were finally released. They fulfilled their oath, and they were able to kind of go in peace. So this kind of gives you like a little taste of what the souls in purgatory do for us. They come to our help, and by doing that, they actually fulfill their oath, and they were eventually released. So it's kind of this cool little parallel thing going on. So let me just shut the lights off, and then I don't know why I split them. So there was, some poetic license that was taken, because actually in the book, they actually, even though in film they have to just build up and release, and in the film they offered resistance. Like they're like, in the book it wasn't that way. The king Hoek, who was the king of the dead, he actually offered his help. He's kind of like, his whole disposition was like, we can help you. Like the souls in purgatory, we can actually help you. So in the film, of course, you kind of have to have this resistance sort of thing, make it more dramatic. But so let me just click out of that. So that kind of gives you a. Okay, so the point of showing that was basically to kind of highlight, in a dramatic way, the significance and the efficacy of their help, because they can actually help us, And they are, as Elrond says, the person who can wield this sword can summon an army more deadly than any other army on earth. And that's exactly what the souls in purgatory are. They're so powerful. Actually, St. John Vianney actually says in the my little book here, and it says in also other little booklets, that he receives lots of help from the saints, but he receives a lot more help from the souls in purgatory. So it's kind of interesting that they are the army of the dead. They have a vested interest. They have a vested interest in helping us because we help them, because they are at our mercy. So I thought that was it would be kind of a fun thing to watch, and also to kind of give you a visual aid and illustration of what, also kind of introduced to the kind of more Tolkien's thought of how in his writings of how how Catholic they are, and how all these different aspects of the Catholic the faith are basically etched into his work. Now I want to jump to along these lines. I want to jump to the actual help that they've afforded people. And so this story is called The Neapolitan Woman and the Mysterious Note, which is a true story and exists in that book that I keep showing you. So I'll just jump right into that, and you'll see how powerful this is. And this illustrates on an historical level what we just watched on a fictional level. So to prove that the souls in purgatory show their gratitude, even by temporal favors, it happened that a humble Neapolitan woman, who had the greatest difficulty in providing for the wants of her family. The resources of the house depended upon the daily earnings of the husband, who each evening brought home the fruit of his labors. One day this poor father was imprisoned for debt, so that the responsibility of supporting the family rested upon the unhappy mother, who possessed nothing but her confidence in God. With faith she besought divine providence to come to her aid, and especially to deliver her husband, who languished in prison for no other crime than his poverty. She went to a wealthy and benevolent gentleman, and relating to him the sad story of her woes, entreated him with tears to assist her. God permitted that she should receive but a trifling alms, a carlin, a piece of money worth about 10 cents of our coin. Deeply afflicted, she entered a church to implore the God of the indigent to succor her in her distress, since she had nothing to hope for from earth. She was absorbed in her prayers and tears when, by an inspiration, no doubt, of her good angel, it occurred to her to interest the sympathy of the holy souls in her behalf. For she had heard much of their sufferings and of their gratitude towards those who befriend them. Actually, I think this morning's gospel was, make for yourselves friends from the mammon of iniquity. Use money, as another translation goes, use money tainted as it is to make friends for you in higher places. So we use money to have masses said for the holy souls who become our friends. Use money tainted as it is to make friends for yourself. So I just thought that's what she's doing right here. She's so full of confidence. So I'll just repeat that part. It occurred to her to interest the sympathy of the holy souls in her behalf, for she had heard much of their sufferings and of their gratitude towards those who befriend them. Full of confidence, she went into the sacristy, offered her little piece of money, and asked if a mass could be celebrated for the dead. The good priest who was there hastened to say mass for her intention and ascended the altar for that purpose, whilst the poor woman, prostrate on the pavement, assisted at the holy sacrifice. I think they could only do that when there's no pews, in the day. So, offering her prayers for the departed. She returned quite consoled, as though she had received the assurance that God had heard her prayer. Whilst traversing the populous streets of Naples, she was accosted by a venerable old man, who inquired whence she came and where she was going. The unfortunate woman explained her distress and the use she had made of the small alms she had received. The old man seemed deeply touched by her misery, spoke some words of encouragement, and gave her a note enclosed in an envelope, which he directed her to take to a gentleman whom he designated, and then left her. The woman went in all haste to deliver the note to the gentleman indicated. The latter, on opening the envelope, was seized with astonishment and was on the point of fainting away. He recognized the handwriting of his father, who had died some time previous. "Where did you get this letter?" he cried, quite beside himself. "Sir," replied the good woman, "it was from an old man who accosted me in the street. I told him of my distress, and he sent me to give you this note in his name. As regards his features, he very much resembles that portrait which you have there over the door." More and more impressed by these circumstances, the gentleman again took up the note and read aloud, "My son, your father has just been delivered from purgatory, thanks to a mass which the bearer has had celebrated this morning. She is in great distress, and I recommend her to you." Isn't that amazing? He read and reread those lines traced by that hand so dear to him, by a father who was now among the number of the elect. Tears of joy coursed down his cheeks as he turned towards the woman. "Poor woman," he said, "by your trifling alms you have secured the eternal felicity of him who gave me life. In my turn, I will secure your temporal happiness. I take upon myself to supply all the needs of yourself and your whole family." What joy for that gentleman, what joy for that poor woman. It is difficult to say on which side was the greatest happiness. What is most important and most easy is to see the instruction to be derived from this incident. It teaches us that the smallest act of charity towards the members of the church suffering is precious in the sight of God and draws down upon us miracles of mercy. So that's a powerful, true story. Just, you can tell the young man is like, where did you get this? And like the handwriting, I reckon it's my dad's handwriting. And she's like, that's him hanging over your wall, like over your door. And the bewilderment of the entire event, it kind of reminds me of an experience I had in New York City. Well, I'll just kind of insert this before I go into the indulgence part, and then we can move on to the second talk. But when I was, this was in 1999, and the friars and I were on our way down to, just a couple of us, we're on our way down from Connecticut down to, we're going to stay the night in Brooklyn, and then from Brooklyn we were going to go down to Washington, New Jersey, your state, where the Blue Army Shrine is, which we had Mass there. We had a day with Mary there. And actually, I touched this rosary to the altar of the Fatima apparition in Coimbra. That the altar is there. I touched my rosary there while I was there. But when we went down to, we were on our way to Washington, New Jersey. We stopped in New York, and it was an Italian family by the name of the Mosconis. They have 3 restaurants in there. One in Manhattan, one in Midtown, and one in Greenwich Village or something. And so we went to one of the restaurants. We had a great time with the family. We got to know them quite well. The mother was actually at home. She was actually dying of cancer. She was actually having a lot of issues and pain with their cancer. But the dad was actually at the restaurant, and he was saying hello to everybody, saying hello to us, and feeding us, and entertaining us, and everything was so much fun. Then we went to that night when we finished our meal. We went to his house, where his wife was, to say Vespers, which we're about to say. At her bedside, but she was in so much pain. She started to cry out in pain because of the cancer was so bad. So we actually had to leave her bedside, and so we had to kind of leave and just spend a night at in Brooklyn, and then we made our way down to Washington, New Jersey, had our event, and then drove back to Connecticut. We got a phone call that she died, so we went back. We drove back down to Manhattan, and then we attended her wake. And so she was there. She was lying in state in a coffin with a bunch of flowers, and and all the Italian family were there. Italian Americans. They're all there. Lots of us, and the friars were there too. And there's probably some other friars from New York City. The CFRs there too. I think they were. And so we were there praying. I was there. I was looking at the casket, looking at her. Wonderful. She's such a super devotee, great devotee of Saint Padre Pio. And probably of the Holy Souls, for that matter, too. I held in my hand a chain and a pile of medals that she used to wear around her neck. She helped out in the pro-life movement down there in New York City. Super uber Catholic, as they say. And so there we were, saying the rosary in front of her casket, praying the rosary. And there we were. And so we finished the rosary in the whole wake service. And then we went back to Connecticut. But we found out later by John Paul, the son of the woman who has passed away. He was a friend of ours, John Paul, and I met his sister too. Wonderful girl. And the cousins were all there too. A lot of them not practicing the faith. So John Paul told us that when they went back to the house for refreshments, one of the cousins said to John Paul, and he couldn't believe it. He told us, he's like, I got to tell you this, unbelievable. He said, when we went back to the house, and we went back to Connecticut for refreshments, his cousin said to him, who was the priest who was standing behind? Who was the friar who was standing behind the casket praying the rosary with you guys? Now I was there. The other friars were there. We're all facing the casket. There was no friar behind the casket. There's actually casket, flowers, white wall. I remember that. It's just, she goes, no, there was another friar there with you, and he was standing behind the casket, and he was praying with you. So who was that? And he goes, I don't know who you're referring to. So the conversation kind of ended. And as they had the drinks in their hand or whatever, and talking and with the family in the house and all that, she saw a picture of Padre Pio on the wall, and she said, John Paul, him. Who's that? He was the one. Is that a friend of yours? He was the one standing behind the casket praying with you, two of you. I'm like, goosebumps, you know? So it kind of, this kind of story, kind of like, you know, it's this whole, the story that we just read in the experience I had, you have this overlap of time and eternity in real time. It's fascinating. So it's real. As Ted was pointing out, it's real. The metaphysical world is real. So, okay, now... Yeah, so it is, you know, and so jumping right into the how do we help them? I want to jump into the use of indulgences. So I'm going to jump into the plenary indulgences. This kind of went off a little bit. Plenary indulgences because partial indulgences are kind of a little easier to obtain. Plenary are a little bit more difficult. So I'll just name them, and then we'll kind of give the criteria, and then we'll say Vespers and go on to the next talk. So you can gain a plenary indulgence, which is, in the eyes of the church, is the full remission of all temporal punishment due to our sins on earth. So by doing a particular work and fulfilling certain criteria. And then you gain, through the merits of Christ and through the merits of the Blessed Mother and the saints, we can obtain plenary indulgences which can be applied to ourselves or to the people those who are dying and those who are dead. So we can gain plenary indulgences for the souls in purgatory by in these ways. And actually, there's a few more, but I didn't add all of them from the manual on indulgences, which the church just issued, the new update. I just got the highlights here. So going to adoration for a half an hour, you can get a plenary indulgence. I'll mention the criteria after all. I list the whole list. You can get a plenary indulgence at your deathbed without a priest reciting prayers with the intention of gaining it. Attending a parish mission, you can get a plenary indulgence. Receiving for the first time or attending a first Holy Communion. So receiving for Holy Communion for the first time or attending a first Holy Communion, you can gain a plenary indulgence. Full remission of all temporal punishment due to your sins or to another's if you offer it for the souls in purgatory. Making the way of the cross, but you have to move for that you have to move from station to station. Like here, you can move from station to station. Reciting the rosary in a church or with a group. Attending the first Mass of a newly ordained priest. Renewing one's baptismal vows on Easter Vigil or on one's own baptismal anniversary. I just found that out myself. I was just like, oh, wow, that's cool. I could do that, on my baptismal anniversary. I didn't know about that one. Renewing one's baptismal vows on Easter Vigil, which we do actually together at Easter Mass, and on one's own baptismal anniversary, whatever date that is. Reading Scripture for spiritual reading for at least a half an hour. Visiting a cemetery on November 2nd. Visiting a cemetery between November 1st to November 8th. Visiting a cemetery. And actually, we have one here. Visiting a cemetery between November 1st and November 8th to pray, even if only mentally, for the dead. Assist at the sacred functions held in a church on its designated day. For example, the other day, the 4th, was the feast of St. Charles Borromeo. So if we went to St. Charles, we could have gained a plenary indulgence by just going there on the actual day of the feast of the name of the church. Yeah. I'm sorry? On the designated day. So look, if you attended Mass on the feast of St. Charles of Borromeo, then that's one work you can do to gain a plenary indulgence. So I have that list. There's a few more, but I'll go on now to the criteria for gaining the indulgence. So those are all the works all the little things that you can do to gain an indulgence. Now, here's what must be present, what you kind of need to fulfill in addition to that. Sacramental confession, either 7 days before or after the actual work. But ideally, kind of on the day that you do the work, But I mean, it doesn't have to be. It can be 7 days before or after. And the clincher, though, is this one. With the so there's 3. So sacramental confession, reconciliation, but you also have to be detached from all venial sin. So you can't have any attachment to venial sin. Like I'm attached to, I don't know, whatever the thing is, whatever venial sin. If there is a venial sin that you're attached to, I'm not sure what that would be. But that would have to be severed to gain a plenary indulgence. There can't be any attachment to venial sin. That's probably the hardest part of the entire thing for people. And then the second one, sacramental communion. You have to receive communion with the intention of gaining the indulgence. Again, that can be, I think, 7 days before or after. So confession and communion 7 days before or after, with the intention of getting indulgence. It's an intention. I like let's say, for example, you receive communion before you do a certain work of a plenary indulgence. You receive communion with the intention, the virtual intention of gaining the indulgences throughout the week that you can. Because you can gain a plenary indulgence every day. You can only gain one. You can't gain one plenary indulgence. You can't gain more than one plenary indulgence a day. So when you can make the intention of receiving communion and go to confession in advance. So reconciliation and communion cover an entire week of getting a plenary indulgence for each of the 7 days, if that makes sense, in retrospect or in advance. And then thirdly, for prayer for the intention of the Holy Father. You can be any prayer, like God help him. It can be any prayer. It can be like the Our Father, Hail Mary, Glory be. Or it can be like, Lord, help the Holy Father, give him strength, give him your love, give him your Holy Spirit, and give him consolation. It could be any prayer. All to be performed within days of each other, if not on this. Ideally, it's like the other day, I was able to do on the November 2nd, I did everything on one day. So I went to the cemetery. Actually, I went to both, ours and the one on Garrison Chapel here, with a Protestant friend of mine whose dad is buried there. So we went together, and he actually was praying with me all these Catholic prayers at the cemetery. It was kind of neat. So he's like, "This is great." I'm just like, "Yes, it is." I'm gonna bring them because he's a wonderful. He lives next door. He lives next door. His name is Ed. He's a wonderful man. And so he thought it was so cool. He's like, well, you guys got awesome practices. I'm like, I'm so glad you're here with me. So we had a wonderful time together. So I did. I visited the 2 cemeteries with him on November 2nd, and then I actually had communion. Actually, I had communion twice on that day because I went to St. Paul's Mass at 9 as well. And I went 7 a.m. here and 9 p.m. there, and I had reconciliation with the friars, the OP, the Dominican friars. And I said my prayer for the Holy Father, actually at the cemetery. So as far as I can tell, I had moral certitude that I did all the criteria. I was like, yay, in one day. So it doesn't have to be all in one day, but I was happy that I did it all in one day. So that was kind of cool. God only knows if I actually was disposed to receive it in plenary indulgence, but I gave it to the souls in purgatory. It's for them. This was like a work I wanted to do for them. Yeah.
That includes the Holy Souls?
Well, I mean, I think God wants us to be specific too. I mean, we can make general intentions, but I think He wants us to be specific too with those who we have in mind. I mean, it's kind of like blessing holy water. We don't bless the entire ocean, but we just bless what comes out of the tap. You know what I mean? If that makes kind of a weird example, but we pray for Christ did say, I pray for the I pray Actually, he said, I don't pray for the world. Sorry. I don't pray for the world, but for those who you have given to me. But God so loved the world. So you can make it a general intention of praying for the entire world. But I think that in our limited, finite minds, we tend to zero in on individuals or groups or things like that. I don't know if that helps, but.
Souls of purgatory. My guess, my sense is if you say souls of purgatory,
it's a different realm. It's a different realm.
It's a different realm. So
yeah.
So
we pray for those because the people on earth. We pray for the people of the world. They still they they're in a different condition, spiritual condition than the souls in purgatory. The souls in purgatory are saved. They cannot merit nor demerit. They're in a completely different realm. They're outside time. They are at our mercy. So I just have, I basically kind of dedicated all my prayers, all my sacrifices to them. I've been doing this for years now. I know it's just kind of how I've just felt drawn to I like to help the helpless. I want to help those who cannot help themselves. It's kind of like the children in the womb. They can't help themselves. So yeah, and so I guess I can end here, and then if there's no other comment.